Out of the struggles of the colonial era and the war for independence, a new American spirit emerges. It is dedicated to freedom and democracy, to the idea that everyone should have an equal chance to make their way in the world. America believes it has a special destiny to transform the vast land that stretches westward from a wilderness into a garden. But the struggle to create a new nation free to one and all will carry America into turmoil and civil war. Even before the Revolutionary War, a new kind of American is creating a new kind of America in the western frontier beyond the Appalachian Mountains. The new lands are difficult to settle, and local Indians, like the Cherokee, are often dangerous adversaries. But a little hardship can't stop colonial trailblazers like the legendary Daniel Boone.
I wouldn't give a hoot in hell for a man who isn't sometimes afraid. Fear's the spice that makes it interesting to go ahead.
Boone is willing to put life, fortune, and even family at risk to tame the beautiful land called Kentucky. A place where a man and his kin could live unfettered and free. By opening a trail through the Cumberland Gap, a natural passage west through the mountains, Boone defines the American dream for a new generation of pioneers. Thousands of families will pour into the new territory, seeking land and liberty. Their version of civilization is very different from the complex world of the Indians already there.
I don't think that white settlers took Indian society seriously. They talk about it as being like, that they are like Columbus, that they are discovering vacant land, virgin land, the new paradise all over again. They never talk about it as an invasion in which they have to remove or eliminate societies that are already there.
Daniel Boone and the other eager pioneers see only the bright future beckoning to them and their new United States. An energetic new nation is taking shape. Villages are quickly becoming towns, towns becoming cities. And a house that will be known as the White House is the largest building in America. America is now much more than the original 13 colonies. The Spanish have built towns across the west and southwest. The French are ensconced on the Mississippi in a burg called St. Louis. And beyond these distant settlements, millions in the Indian nations live free. The United States needs room to grow. one man sees better than anyone the potential for the new nation: President Thomas Jefferson. He is about to set a deal into motion that will utterly transform America. It hinges on another man, very different from Democrat Thomas Jefferson. Across the Atlantic, French ruler Napoleon is waging an expensive war against the English. He needs cash to continue, so he sells Jefferson a little parcel west of the Mississippi, 828,000 square miles. The United States doubles in size for about 4 cents an acre. This is the Louisiana Purchase. Jefferson knows that land equals freedom for the nation and its citizens. He dreams of a golden age of small farmers living off their own land. On a spring day in 1803, Jefferson boldly decides to explore his vast new purchase, his new America. He enlists the help of his moody young secretary, Meriwether Lewis. It will turn out to be one of the most remarkable journeys ever undertaken. Directs Jefferson,
"Take 10 or 12 chosen men to explore the Missouri River and its communication with the waters of the Pacific Ocean for the purposes of commerce. You will take observations with great pains and accuracy of latitude and longitude, the soil and face of the country, the animals, mineral productions, furs of those parts, the people inhabiting, with the names of their nations, their language, traditions, monuments, food, clothing, and domestic accommodations."
Without a hint of fanfare, Lewis and Captain William Clark set out from St. Louis with a company of 50 men on May 13, 1804. Neither man realizes their voyage will inflame the American imagination and open up an entire continent to commerce and change. Jefferson sends Lewis and Clark into the American wilderness on a mission of discovery, not conquest.
"In all your intercourse with the natives, treat them in the most friendly and conciliatory manner which their own conduct will admit. Make them acquainted with the position, extent, character, peaceable and commercial dispositions of the United States, of our wish to be neighborly, friendly, and useful to them."
Unlike the French, only a few English-speaking trappers had ever gone to the far west. They know they will meet Indians, but they have no idea what to expect from them. Will they be friendly or ferocious? But the Indians warmly greet the explorers, sometimes more warmly than they expect. From Lewis's journal,
"A curious custom is to give handsome squaws to those whom they wish to show some acknowledgement to. Handsome, lively women disposed to be amorous."
the Indians find much that is exotic about their visitors, especially Lewis's slave, York. They are much astonished at seeing a black man. For 3 months, they sail perilous, uncharted waters. Then, on August 12, 1805, while searching for the source of the Columbia River, they behold the remarkable, the Continental Divide. Recorded Captain Clark,
"We had now reached the hidden sources of that river which had never yet been seen by civilized man. The ridge on which we stood formed the dividing line between the waters of the Atlantic and the Pacific Oceans."
Camping with the Mandan in the Dakota Territory, Lewis and Clark meet an extraordinary young woman who will help guarantee their success. She is a 16-year-old Shoshone named Sacagawea. Accompanying the expedition into Shoshone territory as translator and guide, Sacagawea forges a friendship between the explorers and her people, who welcomed the newcomers. Sacagawea would become a symbol of the peace and goodwill possible between white and Indian. "18 extraordinary months later, after trekking down the Missouri and the Columbia rivers, they finally arrive at the Pacific coast on November 14, 1805. Commented Meriwether Lewis,
When the fog cleared off, we enjoyed the delightful prospect of the great Pacific Ocean. That ocean, the object of all our labors, the reward of all our anxieties.
Here is a vast continent, rich in rivers and game and resources. Here is new inspiration for a people hungry for land and freedom." Back in the East, in the new cities, Americans are busy building a vigorous new nation. People are free to earn a livelihood just about any way they can. An enterprising American named Francis Cabot Lowell starts with smuggling. Not rum or slaves, but industrial secrets. Out of England, he sneaks the design for large-scale textile factories. And to the banks of the Merrimack River in Massachusetts, he brings the Industrial Revolution, forever altering the nature of work in America. By spinning raw cotton into cloth, the mills create an industry that will power a young nation. Each year, the mills would produce enough cloth to circle the earth 2 times, enough to sell at home and abroad. The mills also create a new kind of American, the factory worker. Most of them are young women, country girls, fresh off the farm and eager to earn their own living. Harriet Robinson starts working in the factory when she is 10 years old.
I worked first in the spinning room as a doffer. The doffers were the very youngest girls whose work was to doff or take off the full bobbins and replace them with the empty ones. We worked from 5 o'clock in the morning until 7 in the evening with 1/2 hour for breakfast and dinner. Even the doffers were forced to be on duty nearly 14 hours a day, and this was the greatest hardship.
Another young New Englander, Lucy Larcom, finds factory life regimented and inhuman. She will eventually become well known as a poet and essayist.
I object to the constant hurry of everything. We cannot have time to eat, drink, or sleep. Up before day at the clang of the bell, and out of the mill by the clang of the bell, into the mill and at work, in obedience to that ding-dong of a bell, just as though we were so many living machines.
I never cared much for machinery. The buzzing and hissing and whizzing of pulleys and rollers and spindles and flyers around me often grew tiresome. I could not see into the complications or feel interested in them.
This was the first time in the whole history of white Protestants that large numbers of women gathered together just as themselves for a common purpose. They weren't there as somebody's wife, daughter, sister, niece, aunt. They were there simply as workers, living together, working together, thinking together, changing together, becoming what they could not have been before. And no woman who passed through the Lowell mills could ever really go home again.
For some, difficult conditions, separation from their families, and relentless work means a deadening of the spirit. But for Lucy Larcom and many others, it also encourages a new sense of pride and economic freedom.
Factory girls themselves belonged to the New World, not to the Old. And they were making their own traditions to hand down to their descendants. One of which is that honest work has no need to assert itself or to humble itself in a nation like ours, but simply to take its place as one of the foundation stones of the Republic.
The northern mills need raw cotton to keep spinning away, and southern plantations can supply it. Very quickly, cotton becomes king in the South. To grow it, the South needs land and lots of it, and the slaves to work the new land. Slave labor makes cotton extraordinarily profitable. So slavery, which may have been slowly declining at the end of the 1700s, is reborn. Hand in hand with the rush of American industry and democracy. For the slaves, it is a life of toil and drudgery, broken up by moments of terror.
Slavery was a violent and brutal institution which reduced men and women to pieces of property. And so generations of black people had to make their accommodation to it and figure out how to survive as slaves without surrendering their sense of humanity and dignity. There were those who ran away. There were some who accommodated and accepted the system. There were some who resisted in day-to-day ways, not working well or breaking tools or just whatever they could do to slow down the process of labor.
A free African-American, Solomon Northup, is kidnapped off the streets of Washington, D.C., and forced to work as a slave on a Louisiana cotton plantation.
In the later part of August begins the cotton picking season. When a new field hand, one unaccustomed to the business, is sent for the first time into the field, he is whipped up smartly and made for that day to pick as fast as he can possibly. At night it is weighed so that his capability in cotton picking is known. He must bring in the same weight each night following. If it falls short, it is considered evidence that he has been laggard, and a greater or less number of lashes is the penalty.
Visitors to the world of the plantation are often shaken by what they see. British actress Fanny Kemble spends several troubling months at her husband's Georgia holdings.
I do not think that a residence on a slave plantation is likely to be peculiarly advantageous to a child like my oldest. She said something about a swing, and in less than 5 minutes, Headman Frank had erected it for her, and a dozen young slaves were ready to swing little misses. It makes me tremble, but I shall find a remedy, or remove myself and the child from this misery and ruin.
Masters often split up slave families to make more money and to maintain order. From a letter by a slave woman, Phoebe Brownrigg, to her daughter, Amy.
My dear daughter, I have for some time had hope of seeing you once more in this world, but now that hope is entirely gone forever. My dear daughter Amy, if we never meet in this world, I hope we shall meet in heaven, where we shall part no more. Let us pray for each other and try to hold out faithful to the end.
In 1831, an extraordinary event in Virginia shakes the South to its roots. slaves rise up against their masters. It only lasts one night. 60 slaves, led by Nat Turner, a 32-year-old prophet who believes he is bringing the wrath of God on the whites, go on a rampage. They slaughter over 50 white people, mostly women and children. The local militia crushes the rebellion by the next day, but Nat Turner remains free for weeks to come. They execute Turner and many of his followers, but the battle over slavery will eventually consume the nation. For most Americans, nothing can daunt the dynamic spirit of the young republic. And nobody believes more proudly in the new America and in the freedom to grow and succeed than Andrew Jackson. Famous as an Indian fighter and the hero of New Orleans during the War of 1812, Jackson is the new America. A backwoods boy from a poor family who has made good through marriage, slaveholding, and land speculation. Jackson hates the old money that controls the government. In a democracy, he believes, the common man, farmers, and workers should have a voice and a vote, and a piece of the pie. It is a powerful vision, and it carries him into the White House. But there is one huge human obstacle to Jackson's vision. The Creeks, the Cherokees, and the Seminole, and other Indians known as the 5 civilized tribes. They occupy the new land Jackson wants to open up for his friends and supporters. Some, like the Cherokee, have worked hard to become good Americans.
The Cherokee Republic especially was a really creative imitation of what the United States had made of itself. Cherokees had a constitution, they had literacy in their own language, they had towns, they had plantations, and they had slaves. They were on land that bore gold, on land that could be made to grow cotton. And to Andrew Jackson's era, that was the problem. Had the Cherokees just been huddling in poverty-stricken villages in the shadow of some mountain, no difficulty at all. But successful Cherokees, running their lives on their own terms, being American on their own terms, that was not to be borne.
In 1830, Jackson signs the Indian Removal Act, which will eventually force all Indians to move west of the Mississippi River. Cherokee Rebecca Nugent is just a child when U.S. troops push her and her family out of their home at gunpoint.
When the soldiers came to our house, my father wanted to fight, but my mother told him that the soldiers would kill him if he did, and we surrendered without a fight. They drove us out of the house to join other prisoners in a stockade.
Most Cherokee have no choice but to follow the forced migration, known forever as the Trail of Tears, to the distant territory of what is today Oklahoma. Subjected to disease, starvation, and winter cold, thousands will die. Treaty after treaty, year after year, Indians will see their land and freedom eroded until it is virtually gone. As Americans continue to stream west, their notions of freedom sometimes lead to fierce conflict. Sam Houston and the 20,000 other Anglo settlers living in the Mexican territory known as Texas feel their land and liberty are threatened by the Mexican government. They also want the freedom to own slaves, even though it is forbidden under Mexican law. Refusing to relinquish their way of life or their wealth, the Texans declare their own republic. To reclaim the land seized by the revolutionaries, the Mexican army, led by President Santa Anna, marches north. All that opposes them are some scattered forces under the command of Sam Houston, former congressman and governor of Tennessee, a hard-drinking leader of men and master soldier. On February 23, 1836, Santa Anna attacks the town of San Antonio. At an old mission called the Alamo, 187 men, including Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie, make an heroic stand. Day after day, in a legendary display of defiance, the Texans inflict terrible casualties on the enemy. On the 13th day, the Alamo is overrun by the Mexicans. The survivors of the battle, including the wounded, are all executed, and their bodies set afire. 2 months later, Sam Houston and his Texans will have their revenge. His men go into battle shouting, "Remember the Alamo!" They crush the Mexican army, capturing Santa Anna and winning Texan independence. It is to be an age of extraordinary expansion. A compelling new phrase, manifest destiny, announces America's God-given right to create a vast empire of opportunity and liberty. It's coined by journalist John L. O'Sullivan.
It is the fulfillment of our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions.
Americans next turn their eyes to the remaining Mexican lands that stretch to the Pacific. By 1848, the U.S. has taken, from the Spanish, all of the Southwest and the wealth of California. This prize is soon to prove more valuable than anyone ever imagined. January 24, 1848, has all the appearances of an ordinary Monday. Then, tiny chunks of glittering rock are found at Sutter's Mill in California. It is gold. The next year, gold-mad dreamers stream west, hoping to strike it rich. These are the 49ers. Among the tens of thousands of hopeful souls are an intrepid Iowa bride, Caroline Hahn, and her lawyer husband.
At that time, the gold fever was contagious, and few, old or young, escaped the malady. Who was going? How was best to fix up the outfit? What to take as food and clothing? Advice was handed out quite free of charge and often quite free of common sense. We saw nothing living but Indians, lizards, and snakes, trying indeed to feminine nerves. Surely Inferno can be no more horrible in formation. The pelting sun's rays, reflected from the parched ground, seemed a furnace heat by day, and our campfires, as well as those of the Indians, cast grotesque glares and terrifying shadows by night. The demon needed only horns and cloven feet to complete the soul-stirring picture.
Caroline and her attorney husband managed to reach their destination safely, only to find that lawyers make far more than most miners. So they settle in town right next to a real live saloon and prosper. By the peak year of 1852, 100,000 miners take out $81 million in gold from the California earth, the equivalent of $300 million today. Other treasure hunters come from across the Pacific to seek their fortunes. They are poor Chinese escaping the Opium Wars, peasant rebellions, and hard times. They have heard about the place called Gam San, Gold Mountain. And by 1852, more than 20,000 Chinese men are eagerly working in California mines. By American law, they must leave their wives and sweethearts behind. Yet the call of wealth and opportunity is too powerful to resist. In the words of a Chinese folk song,
I made a trip to Gold Mountain. With a pillow on my shoulder, I begin my perilous journey, sailing a boat with bamboo poles across the sea, leaving behind wife and sisters in search of money. No longer lingering with the woman in the bedroom, no longer paying respect to parents at home.
The Chinese are part of a huge new wave of immigrants flooding into the United States, anxious to make a better life. The Germans and Swedes farm the fertile land. The Irish hack out the roads and canals for the new nation as it sweeps across the continent. Building a whole country isn't easy, but it is a welcome chance to be free of poverty and despair. To women, both immigrant and native-born, freedom in America means more than the chance of a better life. It means justice, too. In mills and factories, in the lecture halls and meeting rooms, in the new cities and towns, workers, teachers, wives raise their voices in a call for their rights. From the first Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls, New York in 1848, composed by Elizabeth Cady Stanton,
we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that all laws which prevent woman from occupying such a station in society as her conscience shall dictate, or which place her in a position inferior to that of man, are contrary to nature, and therefore of no force or authority.
With true American spirit, women will continue to rally for their freedom in the decades to come. An even more urgent battle looms. With millions of people still living in bondage, a hunger rises up to abolish slavery. Some of the most eloquent voices raised against slavery belong to escaped slaves like Frederick Douglass.
On this 4th of July, I will, in the name of humanity which is outraged, in the name of liberty which is fettered, in the name of the Constitution and the Bible which are disregarded and trampled upon, dare to call into question and to denounce everything that serves to perpetuate slavery, the great sin and shame of America.
Former slave Sojourner Truth speaks from the authority of her 6 decades.
But we'll have our rights. See if we don't. And you can't stop us from them. You may hiss as much as you like, but it is coming.
Their pain gives their words irrefutable power. With other abolitionists, black and white, they travel throughout the North, bringing the message of personal freedom, American freedom, to anyone who would listen. In 1852, a young Cincinnati woman named Harriet Beecher Stowe feels the need to speak out in a novel called Uncle Tom's Cabin, or Life Among the Lowly.
The object of these sketches is to awaken sympathy and feeling for the African race, as they exist among us, to show their wrongs and sorrows.
Uncle Tom's Cabin mesmerizes the nation, North and South. Selling 10,000 copies in 1 week and 300,000 in its first year, it rivals Thomas Paine's Common Sense in its extraordinary impact on America.
They talked about slavery as a sin, the white abolitionists did, and as a sin that had to be cut out, removed from American life, not as something that had to be gradually abolished, but as something that really had to be recognized as way beyond the bounds.
And in many ways, the movement became symbolically very, very important for all Americans who were pro-abolition. So in struggling for the freedom of African Americans, they were also, in a way, struggling for the principle that the most important freedom was freedom not to be under the power of another.
Now the trumpet is sounding. Bloody conflict is about to engulf the nation. By 1860, many Northerners opposed the institution of slavery, which the South takes as a direct threat to its idea of freedom. Nothing outrages Southerners more than the election of a man they hate, Abraham Lincoln. Southerners see Lincoln as a profound danger to their entire way of life. Yet Lincoln believes more in maintaining the Union than in ending slavery. As he declares in his first inaugural address,
I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. In your hands, my dissatisfied countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war. Though passions may have strained, it must not break the bonds of our affection. The mystic cords of memory stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land will swell the chorus of the Union.
it is too late. The bonds of affection are about to be shattered. April 1861. 11 Southern states have seceded from the Union. Asks the President of the new Confederacy, Jefferson Davis,
will you be slaves or be independent? Will you consent to be robbed of your property?
April 12th, Charleston, South Carolina. Confederate cannons are readied. At dawn, the rebel guns open fire on the Union soldiers at Fort Sumter in the middle of the harbor. Mary Chestnut, wife of the Confederate commander, watches from her hotel.
I do not pretend to go to sleep. How can I? If the Union commander does not accept terms, the orders are, he shall be fired upon. I prayed as I never prayed before. There was a sound of stir all over the house, pattering of feet in the corridors. All seemed hurrying one way. The shells were bursting, the regular roar of the cannon. There it was. Prayers came from the women, imprecations from the men, and then a shell would light up a scene. We watched, and everybody wondered that Fort Sumter did not fire a shot.
After 34 hours, the fort lay in ruins. The Federal commander, Major Anderson, orders the flag lowered and a white bedsheet raised in its place. Two days later, on April 15th, Lincoln calls for 75,000 volunteers to form an army to defend the Union. No one expects the war would take very long to win, and they ask that the troops enlist for only 3 months. The optimism is unwarranted. In 5 long, bloody years, 620,000 men will die.
To the south, the Civil War marked a desperate struggle for survival. White Southerners were outnumbered, outproduced, outgunned, and most of them realized that they were fighting for a cause that much of the world had come to abhor. To actually defeat the South meant defeating its entire civilization. Lincoln, Grant, Sherman, people of that sort saw to that. They waged a total war, not a civilized war, not a gentleman's war.
In the fall of 1862, at Antietam Creek, outside Sharpsburg, Maryland, Confederate and Federal troops clash. It will be the single bloodiest day of the war. In the chaos, a single cornfield will change hands 13 times as General McClellan's Union Army of 60,000 engages Confederate forces under General Robert E. Lee. A Confederate officer captures the carnage.
The intrepid Union commander drew up in close rank and easy range and opened a galling fire upon my line. The first volley sent a ball through the calf of my right leg. On the right and left, my men were falling like trees in a hurricane. I was able to walk along the line and give encouragement to my resolute riflemen. I could not consent to leave them in such a crisis. A fourth ball ripped through my shoulder. I remember the pledge to General Lee that we would stay there till the battle ended and night came.
By the end of the day, nearly 6,000 men, Union and Confederate, have sacrificed their lives. 20,000 have suffered awful wounds. But there is no clear winner, despite the courage and the cost. Soon after Antietam, Lincoln takes an extraordinary step. He issues an Emancipation Proclamation, freeing the slaves.
All persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state where people shall be in rebellion against the United States shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free.
The Emancipation Proclamation was really the turning point of the American Civil War. It transformed the war from a war for the Union into a war for emancipation. It gave a moral purpose to the war, which justified the immense loss of life and the greater loss of life which would be occurring in the last 2 years of the war. It brought black men into the Army for the first time, giving them a claim to citizenship in the post-war republic. It meant there was going to be a fundamental change in Southern society arising out of the war, and a new social order was going to be necessary. So for all those reasons, it really transformed the character of the Civil War and was a turning point in all of American history.
Both free blacks and freed slaves stand ready to fight for the Union. But federal officers are reluctant to use them in combat. During the Revolutionary War, Washington had allowed African Americans to fight. Now, Lincoln challenges his generals.
You say you will not fight to free Negroes. Some of them seem willing to fight for you. When victory is won, there will be some black men who can remember that with silent tongue and clenched teeth and steady eye and well-poised bayonet, they have helped mankind on to this great consummation.
Eventually, 180,000 African Americans fight for the Union. Nearly all in segregated units led by white officers. Nearly 38,000 give their lives for freedom. In an incredible irony, late in the war, General Robert E. Lee considers using slaves to fight for the Confederacy. One outraged Southern general responds, "If slaves will make good soldiers, our whole theory of slavery is wrong." For 3 days in the summer of 1863, Yankee and rebel will slaughter each other in a devastating battle that will be the turning point of the war. After a skirmish between advance forces, each side sends for reinforcements. All too soon, 163,000 men face each other. Death on their minds. One Union private describes his encounter with rebel troops.
The Confederates came on in magnificent order, with the step of men who believed themselves invincible. As shells burst upon their compact masses, their shattered lines do not waver, but steadily close up the gaps of death. On come the rebel lines with bayonets glistening. A wall of flame, perceivable even in this noonday light, springs from the muzzles of the line of Union muskets. Volley after volley is poured in, with deadly effect upon them.
"7,000 men are killed and nearly 45,000 wounded. By day 4, General Lee is forced to retreat to the safety of Virginia. The high tide of the Confederacy has been broken. Unlike Antietam, victory is clear. Two months later, on November 19th, Lincoln journeys to Gettysburg to dedicate a cemetery for the Union dead.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. These dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. Thank God I have lived to see this. It seems that I have been dreaming a horrid nightmare for 4 years, and now the nightmare is over.
4 years from the day that Fort Sumter surrendered, a flag of freedom, the Union flag, once again flies. It is sent aloft by the same officer, Major General Anderson, who once raised a flag of defeat in its place. Less than 12 hours later, a final tragedy awaits, when Lincoln is murdered.
O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every wreck. The prize we sought is won. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting. But O heart, 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 O bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead.
A Southern woman named Dolly Lunt gives voice to the anguish of a ravaged South.
Our leaders did not believe that the North would fight. Oh, blinded men, blood river deep and strong have been shed. And where are we now? A ruined, subjugated people. What will be our future?
For African Americans, hope is upon the land. The 13th Amendment to the Constitution outlaws slavery. And the next 2 amendments promise them their full rights as citizens. Louisa Bowes Rose remembers the day she and her family first heard the news.
Daddy was down to the creek. He jumped right in the water up to his neck. He was so happy. He just kept on scooping up handfuls of water and dumping it on his head and yelling, "I's free! I's free! I's free!"
The central issue of Reconstruction, the period that followed the Civil War, was how the United States, North and South, black and white, would respond to the destruction of the institution of slavery. Or to put it another way, what did freedom mean that the former slaves had acquired during the Civil War? The former slaves themselves had a tremendously expansive vision of what freedom was. It didn't just mean not being a slave anymore. It meant enjoying the full rights, the full obligations, the full prerogatives of being a free American.
It is a vision of freedom that will never be crushed.
The most important thing is to be not controlled by another. And that has remained, of course, a very, very important emphasis among African Americans, because they had to continuously struggle for their freedom and keep alive that idea.
For all the pain and tragedy, liberty has triumphed. The ending of the Civil War will carry the country into an industrial boom. The freedom of the western frontier beckons once more. People say, if hell lay to the west, Americans would cross heaven to get there. Just a few years after the war's end, in the middle of the Utah desert, East meets West. It is one of the greatest building feats since the pyramids, a transcontinental railroad uniting the entire nation with a ribbon of iron and wood. Good times are just around the corner. After great courage and terrible carnage, after altering the very face of the continent, America is ready to transform itself once more, this time into an industrial giant and an emblem of liberty throughout the world.